Up next, we recalibrate the top 5 songs from a week in the summer of 1984 based on how the songs have done in the decade since. We have a little formula. What is the new #1 song based on all-time longevity? Is it Prince, Duran Duran, Huey Lewis, Michael Jackson, or somebody else? With commentary from the artist, find out who's #1 next on Professor of Rock. Hey music junkies, Professor of Rock, always here to celebrate the greatest artists and the greatest songs of all time. You know, if you love classic rock and pop, subscribe below right now to be a part of our community, exclusive stories straight from the artists, and watch our new show on Patreon by clicking on the link in the description. As a child of the 80s, born in the 70s, growing up in the 80s, we've talked about it before. Like many of you, I was raised on Casey Kasem's American Top 40. I used to listen to it every single week religiously. I wrote down the top 40 inside my Trapper Keeper. Yeah, I'd root for my favorite songs to climb to the top 10. I'm sure you did too. I'd record songs off the radio on my Maxell blank cassettes. So I'm introducing a new segment today. It's a bit of a tribute to the legacy of Casey Kasem's at 40. I call it Hit Song Redux, where we travel back to a week in the golden era of rock and roll and recalibrate the top 10 songs of that specific week based on their legacy since their peak position on the Billboard Hot 100. In essence, what we redux is the charts based on their all-time achievement. We calibrate the song's popularity with a formula based on a few factors. First, how has the song performed over the years since its original peak on the charts? And I'm figuring this out based on global streaming, because that's how we listen to music. I do this through Spotify since they share their numbers. I'm also going to use YouTube based on the top 5 most viewed videos of that song. You know, usually the official music video, it's an audio video, sometimes a lyric video, live versions, you know, things like that. We also use the RIAA numbers for digital and physical sales. I'm going to weight this at 60% of the total. Second factor I'm going to measure is how the song did at the time of the week that we're measuring. You know, meaning if a song would later peak at #1 for several weeks, but in the week we're measuring it was at #5, it'll be weighted for that particular week. I'm going to weight this at 15% of the total. The third way that I'm going to quantify this is on your vote. We're going to do a poll every time we do one of these. You'll have a chance to vote on the song that you think has stood the test of time the best. I'll weight this at 20% of the total based on the community. The last factor is based on how it's done culturally. You know, it has been used in film and television, video games, sports, politics. How many times has it been covered by a major artist? This factor, you know, it's very subjective and it's harder to measure, which is why I weighted it just at 5%. So let's do this. In this episode, again, we do a redux of the top 5 songs during the week of June 30th, 1984 with commentary from some of the artists. We actually had a poll on this one a few months back. 33,000 people voted. So here are the combined results of the charts redux. Coming in at #5, Huey Lewis with The Heart of Rock and Roll. Originally, this song peaked at #6 on the Hot 100 this week in 84. This was the one week in 84 that sports was #1 in the album charts.
They say the heart of rock and roll is still beating, and for what I see.
The Heart of Rock and Roll was one of 4 top 10 hits on the album. The others were I Want a New Drug, you know, the theme song of the movie Ghostbusters. Or actually, that's wrong. I misspoke. Nudge, nudge, wink, wink.
I want a new drug, one that won't make me sick.
I Want a New Drug went to #6, same as Heart of Rock and Roll. Heart and Soul went to #8.
'Cause she's heart and soul. She's heart.
And If This Is It, the smooth helping of new wave doo-wop, that went to #6 too.
If this is it, please let me.
Since its peak, The Heart of Rock and Roll's done well. It was nominated for Record of the Year at the 27th Annual Grammy Awards, back when the Grammys actually mattered. It lost to What's Love Got to Do With It by Tina Turner. If memory serves, you know, I think Huey and the News actually performed the song on the show. In fact, I think they opened the show with it. It's been streamed 15 million times on Spotify alone. It was also a catalyst for the album Sports, selling over 10 million copies. That and I Want a New Drug, those were the 2 songs I think that really attracted the public at large to this amazing album. It's been heavily used in pop culture then and now, with uses in The A-Team, King of the Hill, and The Office. And in our poll, it was a virtual tie with another song for the second most votes, written by saxophonist Johnny Calla and Huey Lewis. Huey has a pretty interesting story on writing this song. We have the full version, but here's what he told me.
Lyrically, we'd had a gig in Cleveland. You know, we're from San Francisco, and we'd heard that Cleveland was the great rock and roll town, ground zero for rock and roll. And we're from Marin County. We had the '60s. We had the Grateful Dead, and saw Hendrix at Fillmore, Cream at Fillmore, and how can Cleveland be the? I mean, come on, come on. How can they compare with us musically? Thinks I. So we were biased. We go to the Agora in Cleveland, and we're like our first gig we ever have there. And it was an unbelievable gig, and the fans were just tremendous. And they were, and generally they're better fans in Cleveland than they are in San Francisco. They really are, and they're more appreciative. And so we'd had this great gig, and in the morning we're driving out, and I bought this T-shirt that shows the skyline of Cleveland, and it's smoky, industrial-looking town, and it says, "You got to be tough, Cleveland. You got to be tough." You know what? And it hit me. I said, "You know what, guys? The heart of rock and roll is in Cleveland. It really is."
Say the heart of rock and roll is still beating.
You can see the rest of this video at Professor of Rock on our YouTube channel. Okay, coming in at number 4, a band that led the second British invasion of the American charts, causing pandemonium, not seen since the Beatles. Duran Duran with the Reflex. This is one of the shockers in recalibrating, a song based on the long term. In the original Hot 100 chart for this week, the Reflex was at number 1. It was number 1 for 2 weeks overall. Believe it or not, this was Duran Duran's first song to hit number 1 on the US charts. The third single from their multi-platinum album, Seven and the Ragged Tiger, the band wanted it to be the lead single off the album, actually. But they were denied by the label, who didn't like the warbling singing during the "Why Don't You Use It" part.
Why don't you use it?
Record labels are wrong a lot of times. The first 2 singles, Union of the Snake and New Moon on Monday, were also hits and went to number 3 and number 10 respectively. The Reflex was a hit worldwide. It went to number 1 in the UK, the Netherlands, Belgium, and Ireland. It also went top 3 in Canada and top 10 pretty much everywhere else. Of course, a catchy ditty where the chorus is stuck in your brain for weeks. Producer Ian Little remembered what Nick Rhodes came up with on his Roland Jupiter 8 keyboard. He said, and I quote, "Whenever I hear that steel drum part, it always brings a smile to my face because it's so out of tune. Steel drums always are. But it was exactly right in terms of rhythm and tone. So a woodblock sound was mixed in to make it even more percussive, and successfully, it did the job." End of quote. You'd think that if it were number 1, the number 1 song of the week in '84, it'd be higher here. However, the 3 songs ahead of it in this chart redux have garnered far more views and streams since its peak in 1984. The Reflex was a gold record in '84, selling 500,000 copies. It's been streamed a little less than 32 million times on Spotify, and the official YouTube video has been viewed about 6 million times, give or take. Everything combined is just under 50 million streams and views. Culturally, it's appeared on iZombie, American Wedding, Man Up, and Saints Row, and it's been covered by Kylie Minogue and Ben Lee, as well as Less Than Jake. It was supposed to be used in Corky Romano, that cheesy Chris Kattan movie released a few years back, but it was cut. It was actually used in the trailer. It was pretty much the only funny part of the movie. It wasn't even in the movie.
The Reflex is an only child who's racing.
As we go to number 3, the number 3 spot, I want to thank our sponsor, Zenni Eyewear. I have my new glasses. I just got these, okay? I love the fact that I tried these on virtually with Zenni's mirror feature to make sure they fit the shape of my face, and they fit perfectly. You can do the same thing at Zenni.com today. You're going to love it. Go check it out. This takes us to number 3, a song that is the biggest surprise of this experiment. Self-Control by the beautiful Laura Branigan. Laura Branigan had 7 top 40 hits in the 80s, her most famous being Gloria, which spent numerous weeks at number 2 in 82. Self-Control is a blazing rocker with catchy synths that articulate this eerie song to great effect. Laura Branigan had a very distinct voice, and she always stood out of the crowded field of artists that permeated the charts in the 80s, the adult contemporary ones. This song is Why, one of the best examples of why she was so amazing. The song was written by Giancarlo Bugazzi, Steve Piccolo, and Italian singer Raf, who recorded and released the first version of the song in 1984. It went to number 1 in Italy. Laura Branigan recorded it right after Raf, and it peaked on the very week we're breaking down, June 30th, 1984. It hit number 4 in the Hot 100 and number 2 in the dance charts, as well as number 4 in the AC chart, so it crossed over. Actually, both versions of the songs competed near the top of the charts in several countries in Europe, Raf and Laura Branigan. In fact, they were 1 and 2 in Germany, with Raf's version at the 2 spot, while Laura Branigan held the number 1 spot for 6 weeks. And actually, in Switzerland and Germany, Laura's version of Self-Control was crowned the biggest song of 1984. It also hit number 1 in Canada, Austria, Sweden, and South Africa. Self-Control was masterfully arranged by Harold Faltmeyer of Axel F fame, with a deeply transcendent synth line followed by a powerful drum part that led into that revved up guitar that just powers the song. This song is one of the best of the era, with an otherworldly sonic and lyrical quality that transports me right back to 1984 every time. So on this recalibration, this song is 1 position better than it originally charted, coming in at number 3. So get this, decades later, this has been massive globally, with an amazing 109 million streams on Spotify, 2 different videos on YouTube that total 165 million views total. So if you combine streaming and YouTube, you've got 330 million, which is much bigger than Duran Duran's 48 million for the Reflex. This song has definitely been under the radar, but over the last few decades, it's been massive globally, especially in Europe. It was actually introduced to a whole new generation through its use in the video game Grand Theft Auto Vice City. I think that's where the popularity comes from. It's also used recently in American Crime Story. Laura Branigan sadly passed away many years ago. She died in her home in August 2004 from a previously undiagnosed cerebral aneurysm. But her music continues to inspire, as the previously mentioned song, Self-Control, it recharted in 2004, hit number 10 on the Billboard Dance Sales chart the week that... At the number 2 spot, the dynamic genius of rock, pop, and soul, Prince with When Doves Cry. Now this song would spend 5 weeks at number 1, beginning the week immediately following this one. A song that Prince himself would say, and I quote, "What is commercial and what is innovative? One of my biggest records had no bass," end of quote. So what inspired this masterpiece? Well, it's kind of difficult to pin down. When Prince was speaking through music, he usually had a singular focus. Now, in Dwayne Tidall's amazing book, Prince in the Purple Rain Era Studio Sessions, which nails down about every day from Prince's creativity from 83 to 84, those golden years, Revolution keyboard player Lisa Coleman claimed it came from working with her and Wendy in the studio, Studio 3 to be exact, where Prince recorded a lot from 84 to 86. He used to decorate the console with Christmas lights and candles. Anyway, Lisa Coleman said that When Doves Cry came from a healthy competition with Wendy and Lisa. The song's genesis may have come from Prince's former guitarist, Des Dickerson, who wrote a song called She Loves to Video. That Prince, he heard it when Dez's band played a show in LA shortly after he'd filmed Purple Rain. The rhythm from When Doves Cry is as close to She Loves to Video, according to Dez. Let's see. Some have said that Prince wrote the song after director Albert Magolis had requested Prince write a song about a certain scene from the film involving his parents. Prince was very forthright about his character's history with his Scream father. We actually cover this in detail in a different video. But an extended 12-inch version containing additional lyrics is said to exist, but it's never been confirmed. When Prince was trying to perfect the final version of When Doves Cry, when it was being mixed, he felt that it wasn't quite there yet, so he apparently just punched out the bass.
This is what it sounds like when doves cry.
He said, and I quote, "Nobody would have the balls to do this. You just wait, they're going to be freaking," end of quote. Now, a little known fact, despite what has been widely believed about the song having no bass, there is bass in the song. Prince once pointed out that When Doves Cry does have bass in it. He said the bass is in the kick drum. The bass is in the tone for the reverb on the kick. As for the Redux score, When Doves Cry is one of the most iconic songs of the 80s, no doubt about it. Its streaming and YouTube numbers, they're lower than they should be because Prince was, of course, reticent to allow his music on many platforms until later. Doves has had 53 million views on YouTube since mid-2017 and 118 million streams on Spotify. It's been covered by everybody from Metallica to Bare Naked Ladies. It was also sampled by MC Hammer for his hit Pray. Remember that? This song is just a cultural treasure of all time. And the #1 song, Recalibrated, decades later for June 30th, 1984, is from a Rock and Roll Hall of Famer who never had a #1 hit in his career. The closest he ever came was with this song that spent a month at #2, most of that behind Prince, and never got to #1. Almost 40 years later, based on our Longevity Redux score, he gets that coveted #1. It's Bruce Springsteen with Dancing in the Dark. And this particular week, recalibrated with the data from the last few decades, weighted based on its peak position for this week where Dancing in the Dark was higher than When Doves Cry. It was at #2. The Boss is at the top spot, if for this week only.
Even if we're just dancing in the dark.
Dancing in the Dark was the lead single, of course, from Springsteen's blockbuster album, Born in the USA. It's sold 15 million copies in the US and over 30 million globally. Dancing in the Dark would be the first of 7 top 10 singles from the album, which is only matched by 2 albums in the history of the rock era, the Jackson siblings, Michael and Janet. Thriller and Rhythm Nation both had 7 top 10 hits as well. As it was with most of Springsteen's albums, he wrote and recorded scores of songs in order to, put together the right batch of tracks that would fit the message or theme of the album. Born in the USA had over 100 songs that were considered during the course of the album in that period. As they began to put the final sequencing of the album together, Bruce's producer, John Landau, was uneasy. He knew that they had made an exceptional record, but felt that there was no surefire opening single. And he felt that the album lacked a clear picture of Bruce Springsteen in that exact moment. Bruce had experienced some very transformative experiences through his previous 2 albums, The River and Nebraska, into the present time of Born in the USA at that moment. But Landau didn't feel that this was reflected in the songs that they'd picked for the new album. Once they came together to mix the album after a break, John Landau, Bruce's manager, producer, and his best friend, took a combative position, something that only he could do, actually. So toward the end of the mixing sessions, Springsteen, Landau, and longtime engineer Chuck Plotkin spent a long Sunday going over everything that he'd finished so far. And even though they'd finally reached complete consensus on the song selection, Chuck left and John and Bruce were alone. John jumped at the chance to boldly tell the boss that he wanted a first single for the album, and he wanted more than just a guaranteed hit. Landau said, and I quote, this is what he said, "When I used the word single, in my own mind, I meant it in a much bigger sense. The type of single I was talking about was a single that would truly represent what was going on. And I was also searching for a way to express the idea that I wanted something that was more direct than any one thing that was on the record. As I said to Bruce, a song where a person who is a Bruce fan, who stayed with you on Nebraska, even if it was mysterious to him, a song where that guy is going to say, yeah, that's Bruce. That's what he's all about right now, today." End of quote. Bruce admitted that he currently didn't have a song like that in that moment. Landau persisted in the fact that they needed just that for the record. After recording dozens of songs for the record and 2 years of back and forth of exhausting work, Springsteen not only balked, he exploded. He said, and I quote, "Look, I've written 70 songs. You want another one? You write it." Bruce was livid. But he knew Landau was right deep down. Without such a song, the album would be incomplete. The two cooled down, and later that night, alone in his hotel suite, Bruce found himself replaying the discussion that he'd had with Jon Landau. As has been told in various interviews, and most notably in the masterful early Bruce bio by legendary writer Dave Marsh, Glory Days, the boss recounts that he sat at the end of his bed, unable to sleep, hours before the sun was to rise, moments the boss has said were creative treasures. He picked up his acoustic guitar and began to strum a simple riff and had a ready-made opening line, "Get up in the morning." He sang and stopped. No, he thought, I don't wake up in the morning. What do? I get up in the evening.
I get up in the evening.
He sang softly and thought, well, how do I feel about that? And I ain't got nothing to say. I come home in the morning feeling the same way. Man, I ain't nothing but tired and bored with myself.
Man, I'm just tired and bored with myself. Hey there, baby.
Like I said, Bruce has told the story many times and seems to be in awe of those inspiring moments. He said, and I quote, "It was just like my heart spoke straight through my mouth without even having to pass through my brain. The chorus just poured out of me. You can't start a fire without a spark. This gun's for hire, even if we're just dancing in the dark." End of quote.
This gun's for hire, even if we're just dancing.
By the time the sun was rising, Bruce gave Jon Landau exactly what he asked for, a song that defined Bruce Springsteen in that moment, exactly what the album needed, and most importantly, one of the most directly intimate portrayal of the artist himself. It was both bitter and deep, a snapshot of frustration and perseverance, of painstaking perfectionism. It was everything that Bruce had withstood since his preceding, starkly acoustic album, Nebraska. In Dancing in the Dark, he finally let all of that bottled up turbulence explode. My favorite line is one oft repeated, "You can't start a fire without a spark."
You can't start a fire without a spark.
In my mind, it was the 80s catchiest protest song. It's a song about getting out of bed, shaking off the apathy and the boredom, and taking on the world outside. Especially when he sings, "I'm dying for some action," and guarantees that this gun's for hire. Perfect for today's time. Since the song release, Bruce has admitted that that's as far as he'd ever want to go into pop music. Or even key members of the E Street Band who weren't fans at all of the poppier take on the music. I spoke to Little Steven Van Zandt, Bruce's longtime guitarist and foil, about when they were sequencing the final album after Bruce recorded Dancing in the Dark, and here's what he said.
I know that he wasn't going to put No Surrender on Born in the USA, and you also kind of talked him into that as well. And that's one of the greatest songs, one of my favorite songs ever.
Yeah. I thought it should replace Dancing in the Dark, which I didn't like at the time. And, I grew to like it, but, it's a good thing he didn't listen to me. That was such a big hit. But I said, look, if you don't have room, then, replace that Dancing in the Dark, There's No Surrender is, just so much better,
Since its release, Dancing in the Dark has continued to rise. It had the highest recalibration score of any of the songs in this top 5 of this particular week. It's a platinum single, 306 million streams on Spotify alone. His biggest out there, 210 million views on YouTube for a combined 500 million.
Hey, baby.
It got the second most votes in the community poll that we did a few months ago. It's been highly synced in our culture, uses in Saturday Night Live. And the Muppets recently in the Springsteen tribute film Blinded by the Light. It's been covered by some big artists, Mary Chapin Carpenter, Pete Yorn, Matt Kearney, and John Legend, among others. And of course, it introduced the world to the one and only Courtney Cox from Friends. And Bruce pulled her out of the crowd for a little dance, which is a definitive moment of the MTV era, for sure. So there you have it. The top 5 songs of June 30th, 1984, reduxed, refreshed, and recalibrated based on this all-time longevity score. Originally, the Reflex was at number 1, but on the Redux, it's the Boss. Leave us a comment about the top 5. What are your thoughts on this new top 5? What other weeks should we look at here? Let us know in the comments. I'd like to get that feedback. If you like our content, we do invite you to subscribe. And to get all these albums, click our links below. Check us out on Patreon for our new program. Help us keep the music alive. Until next time, 3 chords and the truth, my friends.